Welcome, everyone, and we welcome you to the Resilient Lawyer podcast, and it's hosted also by PMRI. Today, we have a great guest with us. We have Lisa Thomas. She creates actually legal practice resources for baby lawyers while also keeping an eye on their mental health. So, welcome, Lisa. We really look forward to this conversation with you today. But before we get into our topic, first, tell everybody that's watching, how you got on this journey and why are you passionate about helping the baby lawyers, as you call them?
Thank you so much, Mareka and Sonia, for the invitation. Um, Basically, it's just out of a desire to help. Pretty average background, average academic record, took an extra year at university. Nothing to write home about, probably most likely to not succeed. But it just was born, as with most of us, the pandemic was a catalyst. So it was just me wanting to be helpful, and it's just evolved. So as I've observed the needs and listened to people online, and my content, I became a content creator, and the whole thing, like my one liner says, is just creating basically resources that bridge the gap between legal theory, university, and the practice world, which is a huge chasm that a lot of baby lawyers, candidate attorneys, people advocates have to jump in order to succeed. So it's just me making that journey or that transition a bit easier. And of course, once they're in it, then I'm also still available for questions and things like that. I'm self-employed, so I have my own academy. I also do legal education as an independent contractor for other institutions, and just growing my mentorship base. I've got mentorship. I've got wherever there's a need, I plug it within the industry. So I'm not scared to even try things that I haven't done before. And I think I've just come to be known as a go-to person because of that. So I'm very fulfilled. It's a very tiring job. It's a lie when they say you don't get tired doing something that you love. It is very tiring, but I am very motivated to get up every day and just do it all over again. So I'm very
Sure.
fulfilled in what I'm doing.
Great. Thank you, Lisa. And today we actually want to talk about resilience, especially for the future generation, of lawyers. But before we get into the topic, please explain to us, what is resilience? Because it is quite, a buzzword that we've been hearing the last year or two to develop your resilience. What does that refer to?
Well, to me, I won't claim to know the exact definition, but to me, it's the ability to bounce back after a setback. Um, which, if we don't expect to have setbacks, we are very naive. So, if we've grown up in a very cocooned environment and we first encounter failure in the legal field. For me, I first encountered failure at university with my academics. So I sailed throughout my 10 years of school, did very well in matric, but I first encountered failure at university, and it was just a hit between the eyes. And it's just something you have to pull yourself together. You have to reroute yourself. You have to maybe sometimes step back for a while. So often, resilience gets mistaken, I feel, for just gritting it out no matter the cost. And I think that's incorrect. It's all about the comeback. So you've gotta be strong for the comeback. And sometimes to do that, you have to step away for a while. And then, it's there's no and not choose not to feel shame in doing that.
Mhm. And working with, sorry, Sonia, do you have a question also?
No, no, you can proceed, Marika.
So, working with baby lawyers, what are the type of setbacks and challenges that they often face, because you deal with them, on a daily basis? What are those setbacks that they experience?
Well, the first one that comes to mind is when they are applying for articles or pupillage. And of course, we are all told to do it in our third year of study. And we made to think that it's a smooth line or a straight line. We'll just get it, everything will work out. And I get those messages often that say, Lisa, my friends are getting articles, they're getting pupillage. I'm not. What's wrong with me? So immediately there, I know that there's something deeper. There's probably also a failure to plan. They've been carried along by the tide. And I think a lot of them allow themselves to be carried along until they hit a point like that where it's like, what do I do now? What do I do now? So I think that's where, and it's often also in that search. So sometimes the search can be 6 months. Some of them very unwisely choose to hunt for articles for 2 years, which to me is an incredible waste of time. It's in that period also that I often encourage them to say, look, guys, here is where you're going to come face to face with yourself in this waiting time. And you've got to be you've got to have the ability to handle what's coming your way. Now, you've got to have the ability to handle the uncertainty. You've got to sit in the unknown, as they say. So that's where they mainly encountered, and where I often have to coach them or give them certain tools to make it through that uncertain period and tell them perhaps how they can best use their time, and also not to just focus on one path. Maybe now is the time to diversify. Maybe now is the time to reroute yourself and maybe come back to the legal profession. So that's that. If I can come up with one main instance, that would be the time. And then the second one would be when they're actually in the articles, in their pupillage, which is very often for most of them their first legal job or their first job, really. So they're having to handle workplace dynamics. They're having to get their 400 hours in for articles. So it's like a multi-headed monster, and most of them can barely keep a handle on one of them. So it's often telling them, giving them tools even there to say, okay, why are you there? Set objectives. Okay, your principal was really crappy to you yesterday, but here's how you don't take it personally. Here's how you continue walking, or here's how you step back. Here's why you need to step back, and you can always come back into the industry. So those are the two main instances.
Thanks, Lisa. And there's definitely been a bit of a shift, and I think you're probably more aware of it than we are. But I mean, I was just thinking back when I did my articles, we were confronted with a lot of that. But in my view, there's just so many people entering the profession, which I think is probably one of the biggest problems. Because I remember when we started, I started studying in 94, and the class was about 1,000 in the group. And by the time we finalized with our LLBs, because then it was still a separate degree, there was about 80 people who finalized their degree. So there was a natural process where the people either left the degree or they, which I think now with the numbers coming through, and I think you've got a better idea, that has changed the entire dynamic. Am I correct with that?
Maybe I'm missing the question. You want me to
I'm saying,
address?
do you think one of the reasons why they're struggling to get articles and why there's more difficulties than there used to be in the past is just the sheer volume of people entering the profession?
Yeah, very much so. And one of my frustrations is when I see, for example, because I'm on LinkedIn most of the time, I see their headline and they say, for example, actively seeking articles. Or they will send me their CV and say, I'm looking for articles. Do you know anybody? And I will say, yes, you and 100,000 other people. So for me, the crux of that is, yes, there's a lot of people entering the profession, some for the wrong reasons, some for the right reasons. I probably entered it for the wrong reasons, but I made it work. But I think for me, what's the crux of that is, okay, it's fine. You want to do law. There's a million of you. How are you going to stand out? So from the time you're a first year student, I talk sometimes about personal branding, which I think is not really a fashionable thing. It's a necessary thing. How are you going to make yourself stand out so that by the time you get into the field, you've already established some kind of a presence amongst your professors, or you've already been networking, you already have relationships with lawyers and law firms. So for me, yes, it's the numbers. and they need to understand that from the employer's perspective or the principal attorney's perspective, it's difficult. It's difficult in terms of training resources and stuff like that, and the capacity to train, but also because of the numbers. And so if they really want to make this law thing work, they've got to start working on their own. Why did I join the legal? Why do I want to join the legal profession? Besides the usual spiel that we get about, wanting to serve justice or turn the wheels of justice. There must be something deeper, and there must be something, you got to dig deep. And also when you go for your interviews, you're probably going to be asked that. And that's often where they kind of get stumped. When they say, for example, who are you? What are you about? Why do you want to do law? And that's often the easiest question and the hardest question to answer. But I think if they can help themselves amongst the sheer volume of applicants and students, is just to start carving out that identity, I would say, and start, pushing their way into the profession and making some kind of a name for themselves as early as possible.
And then how do you help them to build resilience throughout all of the challenges, that they're facing?
Sometimes some scolding. Okay, so I'm not called law mom for nothing. Sometimes I have to be very, very harsh. I'm naturally very direct. So if it's something that I see is very obvious, I will say, well, if you keep going, this is what's going to happen. And the sad reality is that, it's kind of, I guess it's like being a parent in real life. Sometimes you just got to watch the car crash happen, because a lot of them, despite my best efforts, despite the tools that I put out, I realized quite early on that some of them just don't have the capacity to even employ the tools, which is in itself alarming. So I have to say, you know what, guys, girls, if it's just not working out for you, please, and if your mental health is suffering, your physical health obviously will suffer, your relationships will suffer. It has this concentric effect. Then please, please, please leave. So sometimes there are those that can handle, my coaching, the tools that I give them, and then there are some that cannot. And I will give them very clearly what the consequences will be if they continue in the same vein. And of course, the sad part is some of them do choose to just push. No, I got this far. It's that sunk cost fallacy. I got this far. I invested so much, so let me just keep going. And of course, they end up in therapy, which should not be happening when you're doing articles at People Edge.
Exactly. Yeah, and I think it goes back to what you said earlier, that you get into this for the right or the wrong reasons. And I feel if your heart wasn't into it 100% from the beginning, I guess then when it becomes difficult, to build your resilience and so forth. And in terms of tools, what are some of the tools, if people, obviously there's some of them obviously listening, to this interview, what tools, if someone is now sitting in the situation, they're struggling, they're hopeless, they don't know what's the road ahead, what type of tools can one kind of teach them?
Firstly, I would say, like I encourage them to do when they are searching for articles, and I think it's a very useful practice throughout life, is self-reflection. So like you said now, a lot of them don't know why, and therefore they cannot dig deep. When the trials come, when the difficulties come, when there are difficult colleagues, when your principal attorney is being narcissistic or whatever, if you don't do that kind of inventory, why am I the way I am? Why do I think the way I think? Why do I respond to criticism the way I do? Why am I so sensitive to rejection or feedback? If we don't have this, I would say employ curiosity about yourself. If you don't understand yourself, when you get into this profession, then all these things are going to come at you, and it's going to make the work infinitely harder, because you're just sort of going through the motions. You've kind of followed role models. You don't really know why you're doing it. You don't really know what your place is in it. So I often tell them, if you're waiting for articles or pupillage, use the time to do some kind of you don't need a therapist for this. Do an inventory, do an self-reflection, settle your whys, settle your motivations. If you entered it for the wrong reasons, maybe you can adjust it, you can course correct. Um, because that will actually help you when the going gets tough. And I've been actually creating content around, because I'm doing my own kind of healing journey around what kind of childhood did you have? That kind of subconsciously wires your brain to respond to things in unique ways, because that's how we learn to cope in childhood. So I even say, you know what, if you find rejection a bit difficult, and you had a difficult childhood, here's why. So I create those resources also for them to be curious, and if they need professional help, then of course they need to go and search for it, because again, if you don't do that, then of course this whole professional journey is going to be more harder than it has to be. And I don't want that for them.
Yes, I think from the profession side, and I know you've heard this before, but I mean, I've done articles, pupillage, and once you get through the ranks, the attitude of the more senior people would always be, if you can't take the heat, get out of the kitchen, so there's no sympathy towards someone that's struggling. The attitude is very much still at the moment, toughen up. So how do you deal with that coming back from the profession? Because they're not really making space to be considerate while the candidates or the pupils are there.
Look, when it comes to even the seniors and finding role models, I often tell my crowd, observe these people. If it's possible, observe them in their day-to-day life. If there are things that are unhealthy, if they are not treating their families properly, or if they're rude to clients, or if they're rude to the janitor, then that's not somebody you want to follow. So if you're a person like that and you're telling me to toughen up, not really, because I don't want to be like you. So if that's what it takes, if that's what toughening up looks like, you ought to know that that's unhealthy. And again, if you grew up in that way with a parent like that, if you do that curiosity exercise, then that person's going to trigger you when they say toughen up, because you're gonna hear your mom or dad. So you'll have to be very self-aware that also that representation, what that person is saying, represents the way I grew up, and the way I grew up was not healthy. So it's being able to know, I think, the distinction between what's healthy and what's not. And if you are not strong enough or have the capacity to say, I choose to be myself, regardless of all these sentiments that I'm getting. Because you can be gentle and be a lawyer. That's something that I'm also trying to debunk. You can be introverted, you can be quiet. You don't have to be loud, tough. The female don't have to become masculine. You can lawyer in a quiet way. So I think it's also learning to be comfortable with, no, I'm not going to fit into a mold. And that looks pretty unhealthy to me. And I know that because I'm becoming more self-aware, I'm learning about myself, I'm more curious. So if that's what toughening up looks like, I don't want it. And I often tell people, be your own friend. So be kind to yourself, especially as a candidate attorney, as a pupil advocate. What you don't know, right? And of course, if you're coming from a childhood trauma background, then your capacity is diminished. Unless you go for therapy and start healing, your capacity is diminished. So if you are highly triggered and someone says, toughen up, if you know that you're coming from a background that has diminished your ability to receive criticism, then you're going to say, okay, that is a cue for me to actually go and start healing, or to get some more tools in order to be able to keep up with the profession. So it's not a case of I must swallow my stuff and just be like the tough guys. No, I have to work with the complexity of who I am, help myself, be my own best friend, be kind to myself, And as I said in response to your earlier question, carve out my own path in the profession. So you have to know again why you are there. And all of these attitudes will come up, but it's what you choose to filter through, what you accept as legitimate and what you accept as not. That will determine whether you stay, whether you're in it for the long run or not.
Yeah, I think that's also something that we quite often repeat, and teach is that self-awareness. I believe that everything starts with self-awareness. So, what I'm hearing is that it's firstly exploration, to firstly understand, why am I in this industry? Why did I choose this as a career? And then also going further than that, who do I want to be within that career? Being authentic, that I don't have to fit into that mold. Which I think is very, very important, if we want to change that mold that's been set, to kind of start cracking open that mold, that it doesn't have to look like that, because there's still a subconscious kind of expectation that is what, is expected. That's what I have to look like and act like, etc. But now just, as maybe a wrap up for, our conversation, because I really think there's different elements, that might be certain specific challenges that we can actually touch on, in the future. I think there's something specific that you've mentioned earlier, but we can touch on that again. But just in terms of resilience, you've shared a few tools, but maybe just a final, thought or two that you can leave, for the future legal professions. If they're at this point, it's the end of the year, they are frustrated, they feel a bit demotivated, just to kind of get that hope and momentum back, for the new year.
With anything, with any of the so-called, soft skills that we are required to have in this profession, I always find it much easier to frame it as a life skill, so that it's not, oh, I've got to learn to be tough, or I've got to learn resilience because that's what's required for lawyers. No, learn resilience in the framework of your entire life. So those everyday experiences, getting someone cutting in front of you in the queue, and now it's Christmas, right? We're going to have the hustle and bustle, and everyone's trying to get everything at the last minute. All of these life circumstances, difficult people in your life, welcome the difficult people, right? Because it's in the framework of your life. If you build resilience, then it's an easy transference, or it's an easy adaptation into the legal profession. So if up until this point you were perhaps thinking, I need to become resilient for my job, and then once I leave my job, I'm just a rag doll. Okay, try to look at it, try to contextualize it a bit wider, and think about developing resilience as a life skill, as a tool, as a healthy tool for your life. And then you find, perhaps when you enter into the new year and you get your first difficult client, or your principal or your advocate mentor has the first meltdown, you're like, okay, I learned it. So now this is going to give me more exercise in a professional context. So I think that's also where your capacity for resilience will increase. You build it as a life skill, and then it gets exercised in different contexts, professional, maybe spiritual, and other contexts. And then that resilience muscle, without even you noticing it, there's more capacity. You can now lift heavier circumstances, as it were, like in a gym. You can lift heavier weights because you've built capacity by building it as a life skill, and then choosing to exercise it in the different areas of your life. And so it'll become part of you. It should become part of you, especially as you progress in life and in your career.
Sure. Thank you so much, Lisa. I think, what you do is really, really important. I think it creates an amazing foundation for young lawyers, as they're entering, this career in this field, and with all the challenges. I think you are making a huge impact, in their lives. So thank you so much. It was a great conversation. It was nice having you.
Thanks, ladies. I enjoyed it.
Great. Thank you. Great. So that brings us to the end of this episode. If you want to keep updated with all the conversations that we're going to have, subscribe to our channel. And then also we'll put Lisa's details in the description if you are a baby lawyer and you want to get hold of some of the resources that she develops. And then you can also get in touch with her then there. So thank you so much. We'll see you again in the next episode.